Subject this morning, practical spiritual methods. Practical spiritual methods. The first thing we must remember in practical spirituality is that we conform to the two great commandments. Unless you do that, your spiritual method is not practical. First commandment is, as you know, that we must love God with all our hearts, with all our soul, and with all our strength. With all the power that He has put in us as the life force, the cosmic energy. We must use that to love God. That must be the paramount thing in our life if we are to be practical and use practical spiritual methods, is that goal be always kept in sight. That everything has come from Him, the one great source, God alone. Our allegiance must be solely to Him with everything we've got, including His great power within us. That's the first commandment. And the second thing we must remember is that we love our neighbor as ourselves. In other words, that we play our part in the drama of life with the same enthusiasm, the same force and zeal as we love God, because that's part of His play. That's part of His plan, this drama of life. And we have a part in it, and everyone's path that we cross is our neighbor. And so that's what the second commandment means, that we must play our part in the drama of life with full enthusiasm, full power of God within us. Those are the first two things necessary if we want to follow practical lines in spirituality. In playing our part in the drama of life, we must use the greatest concentration. We must not try to escape from our obligations. That's the tendency. The tendency is to say, well, I want God, so we let the obligations go. But that doesn't go. We cannot escape that way. But if we use the greatest concentration we have by the control of the life force within us to carry out those obligations and play our part to the best of our ability, then the other things which are necessary, the other higher mental and spiritual things, will be much easier, because we have learned to use the life force in concentration in carrying out our obligations as the second great commandment. Now, going on, there are several other things that are necessary in practical spirituality or practical spiritual methods. They are, first, natural living. Natural living is very important. After natural living, when we've laid the groundwork of common sense living, then we must use definite spiritual methods, the right spiritual methods. Finally, we must know the automatic pilot, so to speak, which will keep us on our course. And finally, the last thing is to use those ways and means whereby we contact the great spiritual pilot itself, the one transcendental consciousness of God, from which all things have come. So there you have an outline of practical spiritual methods necessary to once more gain your birthright, oneness with the omniscience of God, His great presence in all things. So let us pass on now to the subject, so to speak, natural living. Natural living is very important. Unless you live naturally, we lay up things in the body as toxins and undesirable effects which keep us from following spiritual methods to the best extent of our ability. We must live naturally. Otherwise, we cannot go much further on the path back to God. Now, natural living is not just one phase of living like housing or food. No, it means these three things. Natural living, food, housing, and company. Those are the three things to remember. Now, they're all intermixed in natural living. We must have the right food, we must have the right environment where we live, but the greatest thing is the company we keep. If we are to live naturally, if we live naturally, then when we take up the definite spiritual methods, we'll have no trouble. It is much easier if you live naturally. So let us take up first food. Just a few words about each one of the three phases of natural living. Food, for instance. Food must be what? Non-irritating, simple, containing the natural elements necessary for life without leaving those undesirable byproducts floating around in us to gravitate down in the body, producing sickness, ill health, and premature death, and aggravating the passions and appetites which we are endowed with in this play of life. So the food must be natural, non-irritating to your system, to my system. That's the important thing. We have to use our intelligence to eat the proper things which are not irritating to us, which we can digest. Some persons can eat certain things, others other things. We must find that out and not do those things which irritate us in the matter of food. Because if the food is not digested, it may be good food. But if it is not digested, it gravitates in the system, producing all these troubles. Now, in a few words, when we sum up the pros and cons about food, I think that Sri Yukteswarji's words in the Holy Science, his few words, hit the nail on the head, so to speak, go to the fountainhead of the matter of food. Now, he notices that unless the mother is supplied by what? By grains, by fruits, by vegetables, and nuts, and milk, and clear water. Unless the mother receives those things, the infant will not receive the milk necessary for life. So you see right there, with those few simple things, we can build our diet around that. It must be natural food, and it must be, secondly, non-irritating to the system. I'm just going to read a word from his Holy Science. As I have said, I think he sums it up in a much better way than I can. Bearing in mind that unless the mother receives these simple foods of grains, nuts, fruits, vegetables, milk, and pure water, the baby will not receive the milk necessary. So he goes on to say this. Hence the observations, the only conclusions that can be reasonably drawn are these, that various grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and milk, and pure water are decidedly the best natural food for man, and which, being congenial to the system, when taken according to the power of his digestive organs, that's very important. A lot of people can eat nuts. Others, they eat a lot of nuts and they have all kinds of trouble. Why? Because they cannot assimilate that food which has so much fat in it. So we must not use that, if that is the case. So he goes on to say, when taken according to the power of the digestive organs, well chewed and mixed with saliva, and this will always be easily assimilated if you pick out the foods that are non-irritating. This is very important to natural living with the stomach ache all the time. How can you do any spiritual methods? It's impossible unless you have a very strong will like the Master had. So let's start right there and take care of this matter of food in natural living so that we can apply practical spiritual methods. So he goes on. That is, if we use the things that are not natural foods, unnatural foods like flesh foods and so forth, and they are not assimilated, they're not digested, they leave the byproducts, then he says this, that when these obtain access to the stomach, not being properly assimilated and mixed with the blood in a natural way, then, in a few words, we can say that they gravitate in the system according to the law of gravitation, ferment, producing diseases, mental and physical, and lead primarily to premature death. So those things must be taken into consideration, that the food must be natural. Everything is according to vibration. The natural way of living, the vibration must be right, because we are a bundle of vibrations. According to the natural dwelling and environment, it must be right, according to the vibrations. And finally, to the company we keep, it must be the right vibration. Otherwise, it produces lack of peace, ill health, and all sorts of things. So let us remember that the food is right when the vibration is right. Just for instance, in the matter of proteins, which I often speak of, in flesh protein and dairy products, perhaps the chemical composition is the same, but there's a great difference. The flesh foods leave that residue, which ferment within us, float around producing disease and all sorts of things. Why? Because the vibration is different. The vibration is entirely different. While the simple fruits, nuts, vegetables cooked in the right way, not just thrown together. Who wants to eat vegetables like that? But vegetables cooked in the right way. And milk, if you can take it, or goat's milk. And if it does not, if it can be assimilated by taking small quantities at a time, not 2 or 3 glasses of milk, you can't digest it. Lots of people cannot. Take a small quantity. Those things produce harmony in the system, and those things, as far as food is concerned, lead to natural living. And finally, just another word from this wonderful book, The Holy Science, which you all should have. When Sri Yukteswarji says, we find, again, that extraordinary means such as excessive fasting, scourging, monastic confinement, are resorted to for the purpose of suppressing the sexual passions, but in vain, as these means seldom produce the desired result. You cannot do it that way. But if you live naturally, then you'll be normal. And those things will be handled in the normal way. So he finally ends with these words. Experiment shows, however, that man can easily overcome these passions, the arch enemy of morality, by natural living, alone, on a non-irritating diet above referred to, and thereby get great calmness of mind, which every psychologist knows is the most favorable to mental activity and to a clear understanding as well as a judicial way of thinking. So as far as natural living, remember those simple things as Sri Yukteswarji speaks of. Natural food, non-irritating, that's the greatest thing. Non-irritating food which does not lay up within your system these toxins and byproducts which gravitate within us and keep us in a stew all the time. How can we expect to perform intelligently spiritual methods unless we live naturally? Now going on to the dwelling place, I think that we all know, especially in America, we're schooled in proper dwelling conditions of fresh air and room and so forth. Sometimes the point of vibration is not taken care of. You may go into the best dwelling house, plenty of ventilation and air conditioning, and the vibrations may be terrible. That cannot be. There must be harmonious vibrations in your clean, wholesome place of living. That's the second requisite to natural living. Now the third, and perhaps the most important, is company. As I have said, even in the best of housing conditions, you will not feel the right vibration. And so we must mix with those people whose consciousness and magnetism has a beneficial effect on us. We must mix with those people who have a cooling effect on our system, not those that start us right up into a great big argument or fight. We mustn't mix with those people. We must mix with those who have a cooling effect because their vibration is right. Sri Chesterji has said it wonderfully when he says, we must mix with those whose magnetism affects us, cooling down our system, invigorates us, because the power of God flows through them, and develops, this is important, our heart's natural love. That's the greatest thing. You know, you mix with some people and you feel the love welling up within you. You mix with others and there's confusion. Mix with those who develop within you the heart's natural love. That's the greatest gift God has given us. And that's the greatest thing in natural living, is to mix with those people who keep your consciousness cooled, who develop the force and zeal within it, and above all, those who develop within you the heart's natural love. The Sri Chesterji says, if we do this, then those people administer peace unto us. So, remember, company is very important in natural living. Now going on quickly to definite practical methods. That is, these things are very important. If we are to use practical spiritual methods, we must use the right method. And the right method, as you know, of course, I cannot recommend any more with more vigor than the Master's techniques or the techniques of self-realization. Practical spiritual methods are necessary. We should at least give 1 hour out of the 24 to God, at least that much. Now, first we must do the tension exercises, the recharging exercises. Why? Because in those recharging exercises, we are developing concentration by the control of life force. That's the greatest thing. If you will use your tension exercises, your recharging exercises, you will find that it will be much easier when you come to the higher spiritual methods by gaining control of the life force through the recharging exercises. Remember that. Don't discard them. Every day have a certain routine, even though you may not be able to do them all. Do a certain amount of them, a certain number. I have given them. You know them all. Do those regularly. Then you develop your concentration. Then you control life force. Then when you come to the next definite methods for spiritual advancement, as the Hong Star and the Om technique, and finally Kriya Yoga, then you'll find it much easier because you have learned to control, direct the life force within you, which is the power of God within you, the cosmic energy. It's not something foreign to your makeup. It is God's presence as cosmic energy within you. Learn to get hold of that, because when you do, His consciousness goes with it. That's the greatest thing. Who would want force without the love of the infinite in it? It goes with it. That's why when you learn to control the life force by the simple recharging exercises, you are doing the greatest service to yourselves. Because then as you take the higher techniques, the Hong Sar, Om technique, and finally Kriya Yoga, it'll be much easier because you have controlled the matrix of the whole business, life force, cosmic energy within each and every one of us. I will not stop to speak about the technique of concentration, except the Hong Sar is one of the greatest techniques of concentration because, as I have said, it controls, directs the life force. That produces the concentration, not any breath control. The Om technique is one of the greatest positive methods, practical methods of spiritual advancement. Why? Because it takes you into the presence of the Holy Ghost within you. It gives you contact with the Holy Ghost as the light, the great light of that holy vibration, the sound of that holy vibration, but greater than all of those things, it gives you contact with the love of God within you. What technique can be any better? Why? Because they was given by a man who was one with God, our own Master. So remember, these methods are practical. If you want the practical methods, join self-realization, get them, and then do them. And finally, we come to the greatest, of course, which is the Kriya Yoga, because it's the fastest spiritual accelerator known to man. Why? Because it controls once more the life force. It takes the life force, takes it out of the senses by control of the heart, takes it out of the internal organs, and finally takes it out of the involuntary nerves, giving you a chance to rest. You do not ever rest the involuntary nerves except when you do Kriya Yoga in a deep and concentrated way. Then you take the life force out of that, out of those different phases of life, the internal organs, even the involuntary nerves, and then it naturally goes where it belongs, the seat of the soul, or the spine, and the thousand-rayed lotus. That's why it's the fastest spiritual accelerator, because it scientifically does those things, which you will do anyway when you go back to God, and which you do every night in a limited way, and when you pass away, you'll go there anyway. Why not know the way? Why not know the highest way, Kriya Yoga? Now we come to the last 2 points, are these. The automatic pilot. We must know the spiritual method of turning on that automatic pilot, and that is Kriya Yoga. Just like a ship crossing the ocean, when they get outside of the coastal waters, they put the vessel on the automatic pilot. Why? Because it keeps that vessel on its course. And so the automatic pilot of Kriya, if you do it, will keep you on the course back to God. But you have to do it. That's why Larry Marsha said, this is the cause of his words, do a little Kriya each day. Because he was the greatest exponent of Kriya that we have known. For hours, 18 hours a day, he did Kriya. We all cannot do that. But we can do as he has said, a few Kriyas each day. We will be kept on the automatic pilot back home to God. And the last point is that we must know those spiritual methods, or these spiritual methods which gives us oneness with the great real spiritual pilot. And what is the real spiritual pilot? What is the real spiritual pilot within you? What is that force that's guiding you? The force you want somehow to get hold of. You may not have a concrete idea of what it is, but you know you've got to get it. That's the presence of God as the transcendental consciousness, the Christ consciousness within. That's what the real pilot is. It is that consciousness which manifested so wonderfully through all the saints. Jesus, Babaji, Larry Marsha, Sir Tessaji, our own beloved Master, Buddha, Krishna. That's the consciousness which manifests through them. Now if we get hold of that consciousness, then we have the real pilot, the real spiritual pilot, which is God within us, our own real nature. We read in Isaiah, the 30th chapter, the 20th and 21st verses. Though the Lord give you the bread of adversity, and he surely does sometimes. Though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yes, he does that too. Yet shall not thy teachers be removed into a corner any more, but thine eyes shall see thy teacher. That is, if you do the proper spiritual techniques given by one who knew God as the Master did and now who is one with that transcendental consciousness. If you do those techniques, especially the Kriya Yoga and the other techniques I have mentioned, then that transcendental consciousness can operate within your spine. It cannot get in unless you keep the spine open. That's why this technique is so wonderful, because it keeps the spinal area or region open so that the presence of God as the transcendental consciousness can enter and consciously guide you. And so we read that very thing here in Isaiah. And thy teachers shall not be removed into a corner anymore. You can see the light of the transcendental consciousness if you do these techniques. It's not imagination. You can see it. a real thing. And so Isaiah says, your teachers shall not be removed anymore. Then he finally says, and having this transcendental consciousness within you, having contacted the real spiritual pilot, then he says, and thine ears shall hear a word behind thee saying, this is the way. It is a reality, not imagination. The contacting of the real spiritual pilot is a reality. You can see the light of that consciousness. You can hear the voice of that consciousness, and greatest of all, you can feel the love of God which is in that consciousness. So he finally ends and says, and thy ears shall hear a word behind thee saying, this is the way. This is the way. Walk ye in it, when ye turn to the right hand and when ye turn to the left. Now, isn't that wonderful? Why should we be doubting all the time? Because we haven't contacted that real spiritual pilot. And so, if you want to know the right methods, the best methods, the practical methods for spirituality, for proper spiritual advancement, my advice is, from my own experience, that's the only thing I know, follow. Follow one who had that contact with God, the beloved Master. Follow his teachings, 100%, his techniques. They are, as far as I can testify, the greatest, the fastest, the best spiritual methods known so far. Follow those. Know your oneness with the infinite Father.